It sounds very realistic. It's both possible and not improbable. That's the judgment you have to make. It's probability that makes things believable.
I've been talking through what happens in the Wargame with Chris Donnelly, the veteran Russia expert, twice targeted by Kremlin hackers. I wanted to test whether he thinks the scenario is credible. He does, and he's explaining why.
What most people are not aware of is the fact that had World War III started during the Cold War, not Germany but the UK would have been the first target.
What do you mean?
The Soviet plan was to launch an air operation against the UK.
Why?
Because we were the US unsinkable aircraft carrier.
He's referring to how the US Air Force used to station dozens of squadrons in the UK during the Cold War. They are still here now, but in smaller numbers. As well as the historic factor, there are very modern reasons for Vladimir Putin's Russia to want to target Britain.
Putin sees the UK as enemy number one in Europe. We are the country which, in Russian eyes, has stood out most against what he's doing in Ukraine.
There is one other key factor. Nations like Poland and the Baltic states that used to be part of the Soviet bloc but are now members of NATO hold Britain in particularly high regard.
The reality of our military weakness isn't seen. It's our political strength and readiness to stand up when the Americans haven't that's recognised. Putin would think in attacking the UK, he will be removing the main backbone to European resistance. There are two really good reinforcing reasons that make your scenario in the bigger picture actually far from improbable.
What you're about to hear is the kind of wargame that's genuinely tested inside government. The main difference is that nothing discussed in this version is classified. Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The Wargame. I'm Deborah Haynes. Episode 4, Ultimatum.
So shortly we will be reading the ultimatum. Okay, very good.
The Russia team is preparing for what's known as the next turn in wargame language.
All happy?
I think we're okay. Thank you.
In the real world, the players in our imagined Kremlin are completely separated from the British side, even though they occupy different ends of the same basement. Keir Giles, who's pretending to be the president, is a top Russia expert with lots of experience of playing the Russian red team in war games. In this scenario, his side is about to defy US calls for a ceasefire. Unlike the British blue team, the Russians know the main moves they will make.
So our primary objective remains to neutralize the United Kingdom as an opponent and as an obstacle to what we wish to achieve.
Yes, absolutely.
As they step back into character, the president asks his top general and his military spy chief how they think the UK will respond. That includes the possibility of Britain launching a nuclear attack on Russia. In the game, the chief of the general staff is played by Toms Rostoks, a defence expert from Latvia, while Maria Enqvist from Sweden is the head of the GRU.
Chief of Military Intelligence, your view, please.
It is our assessment that the capabilities of the United Kingdom are so uneven that, in combination with an unclear will of action, are they truly prepared to go full nuclear on such a superior opponent as Russia? I highly doubt that. So our assessment is that the situation basically has not changed.
Thank you. Chief General Staff.
I would also add that as the result of this confrontation, Britain will become more self-centered. It will focus more on its own military defense, which will make it less likely that they'll be able to do power projection into Europe and seriously threaten our interests in Europe.
On the British side of the basement, the participants have been enjoying a lunch break of sandwiches and crisps, but the only topic of conversation is the game.
You're giving us this is happening fast, isn't it?
Very fast.
They have no idea what's coming next.
For God's sake, we've got to unearth this intelligence. That
Yes!
says that
So not us.
The Russians,
Completely.
you know.
What's happened to the second aircraft carrier? Has its propeller fallen off on the way round?
The bendy shaft.
It's been completely refitted, is it? Yes, it has. When the other one broke.
That was your fault.
It's always our fault.
In the Wargame, it's now 9:30 in the morning on Monday the 6th of October 2025. Sir Ben Wallace, as Prime Minister, delivered an address to the nation just over 3 hours ago after Russian missiles struck Heathrow Airport and several military targets before dawn. Rob Johnson, the Oxford academic who's running the scenario, signals to everyone that it's time to return to their seats.
Right, ladies and gentlemen,
attention.
we're back in Cobra.
Back in the room.
The players assemble for a new Cobra emergency meeting.
Right, we're ready to go?
We're ready to go.
Yeah.
Each participant receives a map of the UK, its neighbouring countries and the North Atlantic. Rob, speaking in his role as chair of the Joint Intelligence Committee, then shares the latest intelligence update.
It appears that the Russian surface force that we heard of earlier is located at location 2 on a map heading north rapidly. A second group of Russian aircraft have been detected moving south off the Norwegian coast, and these have launched a second wave of missile strikes towards the UK. We've also detected Russian submarine launches from, again, locations marked on your map between W and Z. These missiles appear to be at full supersonic velocity. 10 missiles are directed towards London and 2 each to GCHQ, Cheltenham, Lossiemouth, Coningsby and Fansleigh. Anti-ship missiles are directed against the UK Type 45 that's currently in the North Atlantic.
Russia has just launched a second wave of strikes, targeting London as well as the UK spy agency GCHQ in Cheltenham. 2 Air Force bases are also in danger, while the UK's nuclear submarine base in Scotland is once again a target. All incoming missiles are travelling faster than the speed of sound, making them even harder to intercept. If this were happening for real, right now British fighter pilots would be racing to their jets to get airborne. They may well be able to see missile streaks in the sky. It's not possible to know how they'd be feeling at this point, but there's surely a chance of some of those pilots not coming home. The Royal Air Force, fighting alone without NATO allies, is woefully outgunned compared to the Russian forces attacking them.
We believe it will take about 20 minutes for the missiles to arrive on Cheltenham and on London, less perhaps on the other bases. We have very little time left, Prime Minister. That concludes the intelligence brief.
Right, okay. Right. So, are we in position from any of the launch sites to respond militarily, CDS, to any of the launchers? While these missiles are in the air, are we in position to
shoot them down?
Well, not just shoot the missiles down, but shoot the people who launch them.
General Sir Richard Barrons, as Chief of the Defence Staff, or CDS, says his Air Force will do what it can against the cruise missiles, while a single Type 45 warship at sea is the only piece of equipment capable of shooting down any ballistic missiles.
which is the same Type 45 that's dealing with anti-ship missiles being fired at it. So we must assume that probably all of these missiles are going to reach their target. In terms of the launch platforms, because we've detected the launch, we'll be able to tell roughly where those submarines are. It will be a matter of serendipity whether one of our submarine surface or airborne assets is in the area, but they'll now at least be able to go and look. But the Russians will know that, and we should assume those aircraft, ships and submarines are not left alone when they try and find those targets. So we're going to have a maritime fight now.
The Defence Secretary, played by James Heapy, has an even more immediate worry.
My first concern is that we've got 60 minutes remaining of time of flight, and I'm not clear what can be done to warn civilian populations who are in mortal danger around these incoming missiles. I wonder if the Home Secretary has any understanding of the state of our missile warning systems, air raid alarms.
Amber Rudd, as Home Secretary, is also very alive to the threat to life.
Since every minute counts, if we're going to alert the people who are living in the places where these bombs are headed, we should do so immediately using the phone alert system.
The Prime Minister reminds his colleagues this is something the authorities would automatically be doing, despite a lack of practice about how to act in a state of war.
The emergency services are a bit like the military in the sense of on an automatic response without having to bring it back to Cobra. All we get from defence is it's coming your way, and then they do the rest.
Prime Minister, what is the rest here? Because in the absence of any kind of civil defence organisation these days, are we advising people to stay at home and be a sitting duck?
Jack Straw, in the role of Foreign Secretary, is referring to the Civil Defence Corps, which was formed at the start of the Cold War but disbanded in the late 1960s. At the time, it had an army of 75,000 volunteers to help support the country in the most devastating emergencies, up to and including nuclear war. In the Wargame, our imagined first responders are doing the best they can.
We have taken the initiative, Foreign Secretary, of letting the specific areas that are going to be targeted know, and so they are being advised to move. I mean, you can imagine it's fairly chaotic, but I don't think we should make a judgment on whether to not to let them. We should let them know.
No, absolutely.
And everybody else to stay at home.
Sorry.
Lord Mark Sedwell is the National Security Advisor.
We're going to be dealing in 10 minutes with mass casualty events, and the emergency services are just going to have to respond to that. Nothing we can do in this room is going to change that.
These missiles are going to strike, and the time we have remaining, the most useful thing we can do is get ahead of this and tell people what has happened and what they should now do, because this will be overwhelming in terms of damage and uncertainty.
It seems to me that one of the things that we have to do is take lessons from what happened in Ukraine.
Helena Kennedy, as the Attorney General.
The Russians have no compunction about abiding by the laws of war. They're pretty reckless in relation to civilian casualties. And I think we have to be telling people to get into basements if they have them in their houses, to find shelter in places that might be below surface level, and to take shelter in places that are protected.
We never know where the Russians will fire at next. Can we craft immediately guidelines and response to what to do if you are in a targeted area? And that may be as simple, sadly, as take cover. I remember the 1980s leaflets that basically said that.
Kitchen table.
Yeah, whatever it is. But
better than nothing.
But it's better than running them out into the street where a thing might land.
PM, these missiles are going to strike within the next minute or two, so we'll know very soon exactly what consequences they've had. Just to update you, all the guidance has gone out, phone alert issued, civil resilience forums activated, etc. Emergency services are standing by, but we'll find out what has happened. The assessment coming from, I've just been told from the intelligence agencies, but JIC Chair may want to confirm this, is the second wave was essentially a repeat of what they've done in Ukraine, which is to catch emergency services in response. And so that they're hitting our civil capabilities as well as our military capabilities, but with that strategic aim of dividing NATO.
Suddenly, confirmation comes in of the missile strikes.
Prime Minister, I've just been informed that missiles have struck on locations here in London.
Where?
The damage report will be coming up very shortly.
A map flashes up on a big screen showing central London. 4 red circles identify the location of the 4 areas in the capital that were impacted.
4 locations have been struck.
The team tries to work out exactly what's been hit. Had the strikes happened for real, one of the targets is in Whitehall, so they would have heard the impacts and maybe even felt the blast waves.
Looks like the Admiralty building at Westminster.
Well, we'll get a full damage report to you as soon as we possibly can.
Wellington Barracks.
Oh, close to Buckingham Palace.
Wellington Barracks, is it?
Looks as though it's close to Parliament too.
Looks like Oxford Street.
Oxford Circus, they've hit Oxford Circus. Whether that was intentional or not, who knows?
The National Security Advisor is given precise information on the damage.
So the strikes against London were the MOD, Oxford Street, Wellington Barracks, Millbank. Emergency services are responding.
This second wave is far more public than the first, and the effect will be even more traumatising for the country.
Yeah, okay.
Our imagined news channel is rolling live on the crisis. Behind the scenes, the newsreader is handed an update by her producer.
Okay. We'll stay on air. Right. We have some more breaking news. Russia has launched a second wave of missile strikes against the UK. 4 sites across London have been hit, including the Ministry of Defence and Oxford Street. Police say there are casualties, but there are no...
2 ballistic missiles have hit Oxford Circus. They crashed down just outside the tube station entrances, where Oxford Street meets Regent Street, killing 2 people and wounding several more. On a normal Monday morning, this intersection of shops and cafes would have been fairly busy, but most people followed the instructions to stay at home, so the number of casualties is mercifully low.
With the country reeling, a Downing Street spokesperson has repeated calls for the public to stay at home if you can and await further information.
The damage to buildings on Oxford Street is devastating.
You can see a massive crater in the ground there. You can see the force of the blast didn't just destroy this area, but also shattered glass on an apartment block over there.
I've seen the impact of ballistic missiles for real while covering the war in Ukraine.
People here are very resilient. They've had to deal with so many strikes like this.
On Oxford Street, the strike tears 2 giant craters in the road, taking out an entire row of shops and shattering windows more than 500 metres away. Twisted lumps of metal and other pieces of shrapnel are strewn in all directions. 2 cruise missiles hit the Ministry of Defence, or MOD, a large building in Westminster that stands across the road from the Prime Minister's residence at number 10 Downing Street. The attack leaves 2 large holes in one side of the building. Glass and lumps of concrete litter the ground below. The blast wave rattles the windows of government buildings along Whitehall. 2 more missiles blast into an office block in Millbank. It's close to the Houses of Parliament on the River Thames. The 4th site is Wellington Barracks, a military base near to Buckingham Palace.
Casualties are 32, of which at least 2 have been killed. I'll be amazed if that number remains the same, but that's all that's reported so far. And the 6 Russian missiles were interdicted, CDS. So good work by the military there.
2 military facilities elsewhere in the country appear to have been hit. We've been asked not to give further details for security reasons.
At Lossiemouth, they hit 3 Typhoon aircraft, 10 casualties. Coningsby, buildings, no casualties.
Lossiemouth in Scotland and Coningsby in Lincolnshire are the bases from where the British fast jets would have scrambled to defend against the strikes. Then comes news of the most significant blow yet to the UK's defences.
A secure government location in Cheltenham has also been hit.
GCHQ destroyed, the building destroyed. That is a massive issue for us, strategic issue for us, but the evacuation was a success.
2 ballistic missiles have hit the vast circular GCHQ site. It's one of the UK's main spy agencies and the key provider of signals and cyber intelligence.
No casualties at Fowles Lane. So far, casualties have been remarkably light and, in my view, implausibly light, and we must expect that number to rise.
This is a deeply unsettling time. Do keep listening. We'll keep you updated as much as we can. We're now broadcasting from a secure basement, and we'll stay on air with continuous news programmes.
Can I suggest, PM, the crucial thing we need to determine in terms of our next move is what is the United States going to do? Because they said that they would respond. If they don't, and we're on our own, we don't have very many options, and they are pretty terrifying, but we do have to then have that conversation, I'm afraid.
It's the starkest observation any national security advisor could make. With this second wave of Russian missiles, the Prime Minister and his top team must decide what they do next. Can they finally convince the United States and the UK's other allies to step up? If not, London could be left with 2 choices: admit defeat or escalate to nuclear war.
I'd suggest we get the Secretary of State on.
We get the Secretary of State on, but at the same time, I think we have to pull out all the stops and start confirming which allies are with us.
Yep.
And I'd like to know as soon as possible who have said they will support us, not just in word, but in deed. And Secretary of State of Defence then effectively coordinate a military planning process that involves them as soon as possible, and as much intelligence clearance as we can give to share with them.
The Chancellor, played by Jim Murphy, has a suggestion about how to win over Washington.
I wonder, in the privacy of these 4 walls, whether we ask the palace whether, of course, the King may speak to the President of the United States.
Bad idea.
For the reasons that we all understand, the President has great affection for our royal family, and he may respond better from one head of state to another head of state. And there may also come a time, of course, that we perhaps invite His Majesty to address the nation.
I think on the latter point, that is important. I think at this time we get the King to address, if he wishes to, the nation. And I think secondly, I think you are potentially right, we should try every avenue, whichever works, I think is important.
Tensions then start to emerge between the Defence Chief and the Chancellor over why the UK has been left so badly defended, as the Prime Minister asks yet again about the availability of the Navy's Type 45 destroyers. These warships are the only piece of British kit that can intercept ballistic missiles.
We have 6 Type 45s. We have 1 at sea. Where are the others, please?
The others are in refit.
All 6 of them, but we usually try.
So we own 6. We can generally manage to operate 2. One is at sea and just being attacked. I think 1 has been damaged in the attack on Portsmouth. And the other 4 are in various stages of refit. And that means that they're not ready for sea. That they are absolutely of no value in the circumstances we currently find ourselves right now.
Can they fire before they're destroyed?
So the Type 45 that's at sea is well placed to defend itself against cruise and ballistic missiles and air attack. That's what it's doing. Its job is to protect the things it normally accompanies, like the carrier.
But if these other ones are in for refit in dock, is there a capability of them to fire offensively at anything?
No.
Because they will be destroyed very soon.
So they're not at a state of readiness where their radars function or are any use. And in some cases, they don't have enough of the essential spare parts, or they have no missiles on board and they have no crews on board that could fight the vessel.
At no point do I ever remember the Treasury being told any of this.
From my position of CDS, I would have to say we've been reporting for more than 2 decades the state of UK defences as we went through the decline of the post-Cold War era. None of this should be a surprise to the government.
As we've learnt throughout this series, the UK only has very limited air defences. The previous day, the Prime Minister was told there were only enough jets to offer some kind of defence against cruise missiles at 2 sites. He opted not to put the aircraft over London, choosing military infrastructure instead. Given the scale of the strikes, it would have made little difference either way.
Well, we'll all learn the lessons from this, of course, hopefully massively soon after the conflict, but 1 ship at sea?
Possibly 2.
Okay.
PM, can I suggest...
We're not going to solve that in
We're not going to
this
solve
instant.
that, exactly.
The National Security Advisor steers the discussion back to the immediate crisis, because ministers must decide what to do.
We do need to be prepared for further waves, and so that advice needs to go out to the wider population pretty much straight away. And then the decisions for you, however, this group of ministers, is what are we going to do about this? And we need to understand whether we're doing something about this on our own or with allies, I would suggest, critically first. CDS may have some more.
2 questions. One specific is, may I now sink that Akula 2 submarine I have under control?
The Defence Chief is talking about the Russian attack submarine that surfaced off the coast of Scotland the previous day. The Prime Minister gives the green light.
Yes. I think it is important that we message that for every action there will be a reaction.
And secondly, given we are where we are, do you believe we are effectively now in a state of general war with Russia, in which case, can I tell CGO if he can find a Russian target to destroy it? Are we at that point
Not
now?
yet.
No.
We are at the point of let's find the target, but let us stay within the locality of where these assaults are being fired from and the flotilla, the formation that is doing it. And while the Akula class is not the one who actually fired the missiles, we don't think, it is part of the guard of that formation, and therefore it is proactively part of what it is trying to do.
The Prime Minister also asks again for what he calls strategic dilemmas to turn the pressure onto Russia from different, unexpected directions. And he has a suggestion.
Where is 16 Air Assault Brigade at this present moment of time? Where is Norway and Finland in support of us, given the changes on their border?
16 Air Assault Brigade is the Army's global response force, while Norway and Finland share borders with northern Russia, where the original attack on the Russian naval base in Murmansk occurred.
Murmansk, where many of those submarines are launched from near, has the biggest concentration of nuclear warheads in the world. There is usually very little between the border and Murmansk. The deployment of 16 Air Assault Brigade to either the Finnish-Russian border or the Norwegian-Russian border would very quickly give Russia a very strategic dilemma about where it A, puts its troops, and B, the strategic threat to its stores of its nuclear weapons. I would not like to be Russia with 16 Air Assault Brigade on my border about 100 kilometres away.
We'll work up all those options.
Please do.
Across a corridor, in his separate room, the CJO, or Chief of Joint Operations, is also tracking the Russian missile attack with his team of 6 expert advisors. Tom Sharp, the former naval officer we met in the previous episode, and Professor Lucy Easthope, an expert on disaster relief, are the first to comment.
So London's on fire.
Yeah, it's a really sobering moment, isn't it? And it's a very different sense of being under attack, seeing casualties, losing people.
The fire in London thing is the first point at which the general public will go, what's going on here? Where's the military? The minor attacks, dare I call them that, in the bases will be okay.
That's what military are for.
And we, of course, don't get this because we understand that military shortcomings so much, but most of the general public do not. They will be expecting us to come to the rescue at this point. Because if we don't manage those expectations and we fall into that legitimacy trap where the public support goes away, I mean, again, I don't think it's likely.
What kind of thing are you thinking about,
I don't think
Tom?
it's likely. No, but I do think there's a problem at this point in the conflict with the general public going, where's the military?
Lieutenant General Sir David Capewell as Chief of Joint Operations.
Much of the military activity that's going on is not seen and heard by the public.
100%.
But a fire in London, a few bombs on the right target, will resonate so quickly. It'll paralyse to start with, because people do that and institutions do that. And I think the debate we would be operating inside is a massively volatile and toxic 100%. Public debate.
Sir Bernard Gray, the defence procurement specialist, says the strikes, while shocking, are still limited.
It's still a calibrated attack, isn't it? It's not launch everything.
It's not hard and fast.
No.
It's not hard and fast.
Hard
and fast attack, sorry, that's the,
It's not an over... We're not
it's
yet
not that.
at...
Still calibrated.
It's not all out.
Correct, that's what I mean by hard and fast.
Yeah.
A former senior civil servant, Matthew Saville, spells out the reality of the attack on the Ministry of Defence, where he used to work.
The 7th and 8th floors of the MOD going boom is that, like, the glass is landing in Downing Street.
Yeah.
That's what's happening.
Yeah.
When civilians are attacked on Oxford Street at Oxford Circus, that takes your emotional response into a new place.
Daniel Tarshish also used to work for the government and is an expert on national security. He, along with Matthew, think the UK should use the strikes to sway their allies, especially the Americans, finally to join the fight.
The selection of a purely civilian target is all the other targets have had some kind of military association. Even Heathrow could be seen as...
The US ambassador should be being summoned into King Charles Street and number 10, walking by the MOD and the glass and the blood on the streets.
Matthew is suggesting the US ambassador is invited to walk to the Foreign Office, which is often referred to by its address on King Charles Street, and see firsthand the damage to the Ministry of Defence.
This is the moment when we can turn the tide within those critical on-the-fence groups.
If politically they're prepared to take the risk, the message to the US and NATO after this should be, if not now, when?
I think the question of what we should do next is defined by the aggregate insult to the UK. We've lost a naval base, we've lost quite a lot of military facility, we've lost the GCHQ, strikes on London. When you add it all up, there's no question in my mind, it's tantamount to a major act of war. So the question is, the operational question is, which has to be translated into a political question, is that if we are now acting alone, we have very few options available to us, most of which start at the nuclear threshold. Therefore, allies, and particularly Uncle Sam, what are you going to do about it conventionally to come to our assistance and come to aid and abet to stop us striking by nuclear means?
Because we're now in danger of being backed into a corner and,
well, the fait accompli point is made.
The warfighting commander then issues a question to be sent back to the Cobra meeting. When he mentions the NAC, he's referring to the North Atlantic Council, which is the main decision-making body at the NATO alliance.
So my question now is, to be transmitted very quickly, is that we are backed into a corner, very few routes out available to us, most of which include nuclear escalation. And therefore, what are the Cabinet doing about engaging American support conventionally to dampen down this conflict, and other members of the NAC and NATO, and other allies? Because unless a conventional solution is found, we have very few options left open to us.
Isolated and under fire, The UK does not have many options to fight back short of a nuclear strike. One move it can make, though, is to sink a Russian submarine spotted off the Scottish coast. Tom Sharp, the former naval commander, helped me imagine how such an attack might unfold. Deep beneath the North Atlantic, the Royal Navy has been using one of its attack submarines, HMS Astute, to track the boat. The British captain has his orders. They simply read, "Engage enemy submarine immediately." He and his crew have practiced such a move many times before, but never for real. Finding a good position to strike, but also to evade any counter-strikes, the captain runs through his final checks, then gives the order to fire. The noise of a spearfish torpedo being launched is deafening. If the Russian submarine hadn't been aware of the British boat's presence, it is now. No one moves or breathes in the control room, half waiting for the sound of a successful attack, half listening for a counterfire. The British side then launches a second torpedo. They hear 2 explosions as the weapons find their target. But this is not a moment to celebrate. The crew must now dodge the inevitable attempts to find them. Their attack marks only the second time ever that one submarine has sunk another while both submerged. It last happened towards the end of the Second World War, when a British submarine destroyed a German U-boat in February 1945. The Kremlin soon learns of its loss.
Mr. President, we have received some intel,
Which is
grave indeed.
We have lost an Akula 2 submarine. Shortly, when the commander of the Northern Fleet comes back online, we will ask him to explain how serious a setback this is.
The Russian president contacts his commander, who's played by Robin Hagblom, a Finnish naval analyst.
Admiral, you have lost a submarine. This is beginning to look careless. Can you explain to us, please, what the implications of this are for the mission and how serious a setback it is?
This is indeed a more significant loss compared to the earlier destroyer, which was sunk. We are probably looking at 2 distinct British submarines at sea, one which has been shadowing our main flotilla and one which apparently has been following our submarine. The good news is that, considering the small size of the British submarine force, they shouldn't be able to do much else.
The Russians have identified yet another British weak spot. The Royal Navy only has 5 hunter-killer submarines in service, less than half the size of the fleet at the end of the Cold War, and of these boats, only 2 are currently available to deploy. The other 3 have been out of action for more than 2 years, in large part because of a lack of capacity to carry out maintenance. The fleet is also smaller than planned. The original concept back in the 90s had been for the Navy to buy 8 submarines. I've gone back and looked through a National Audit Office report on the programme. It says the first order was placed in 1997, but a squeeze on the defence budget by the Treasury meant production was slowed down and costs increased. Now only 7 are being bought, with the final 2 not yet in service, almost 30 years after the initial order. Back to the Russian naval commander.
Our nuclear submarine force is needed to protect our nuclear deterrent. So we can't afford to take significant losses. If we are starting to see significant losses, we will have to defend the deterrent with all means possible, including unconventional ones.
So it is an operational setback which could have strategic consequences. It is reasonable for your flotilla to move to a defensive posture. Its main mission has been accomplished. We direct, therefore, that you move to a defensive position and concentrate primarily on preserving the rest of our flotilla.
In the Cobra room, the defence chief is laying out his concerns to the Prime Minister.
We need to recognise that every time we get a missile attack, our stock of missiles is only getting smaller. And our ability to resist this is measured in days, not longer than that. We need to recognise the UK has been isolated, not least from NATO, and the security paradigm we've relied on for 75 years has not functioned. We're close to losing control of the North Atlantic, giving Russian submarines, aircraft and ships free rein. That is not in the US's interest or the rest of Europe. However, my major concern is the initial targeting was very firmly focused on the military architecture, but the missile on Oxford Street, aligned with the below-threshold attacks we saw on our power infrastructure and ports, indicates that Russia is turning its power onto daily national life, onto civil will. The further they push you on that, the closer you will be taken to the only thing you have left is the strategic nuclear deterrent. And surely NATO and the US need to realise that if they don't stand up and engage, that is the place that you'll be left in, because otherwise the country will be on its knees.
The Prime Minister, though, points out Russia's limitations too.
I understand where he is trying to push, but I do not believe he is trying to push in the invasion or the subjugation of the United Kingdom. I think he's already 2/3 of the way where he wanted to, which is a fractured NATO, an isolated Britain. I also think we are in a dangerous position, though, about because we might run out, we shouldn't do something. That means we don't do something. We just have a nice vault full of missiles that we didn't use because that's the only way we don't run out. In the end, it is a war of attrition. That is the lesson of Ukraine. And currently, unfashionable as it might be to say, the body count is actually in our favour. The number of people who would have lost their lives on the Russian destroyer and indeed the Akula-class submarine will outstrip the number of lives lost probably by UK citizens on the strikes, which have thankfully been low in number. Russia is not a bottomless pit either of military asset, and while it has got a task force, I think what I would say is, having twice now engaged in self-defence the task force, how much more damage could we do to the task force, CDS, if that was our focus?
The Home Secretary draws on Britain's history of enduring Nazi bombing raids. It might sound surprising, but experts in disaster relief say people don't tend to panic when under armed attack. Instead, they pull together.
And Prime Minister, if I may, from your position, or your statement about the fact that we've had less actual casualties, the British public have responded with a certain blitz spirit in terms of strength and resilience. And I think that your excellent speech and statement earlier today, if I may say so, did a lot to calm the public down.
The Defence Chief is a lot less upbeat.
Prime Minister, so a number of things. First of all, I should describe to you the current military balance. So as you know, we have sunk a Russian destroyer and a Russian submarine. On our own account, we have a Type 23 damaged, a Type 45 damaged, a carrier damaged. We've lost 7 Typhoons. Both the air stations that support the Typhoons have been badly damaged. They are still flying, but it's increasingly difficult to sustain, and I've already described the shortage of missiles in due course. At Lossiemouth, which supports the maritime reconnaissance aircraft, the submarine killing aircraft and the air-to-air refueling tankers, there's quite a lot of damage, including damage to tankers. The F-35 fleet relies on those tankers to get any decent operational range, and Portsmouth is badly damaged. So we are still in the fight, but proportionally our losses are significantly greater than the Russians have taken.
Thank you.
Can I suggest, PM, we get the US Secretary of State back on the line?
The National Security Advisor also has a reality check for the room.
And you say to him that unless they get engaged and bring this to a halt, we can't prevail in a purely conventional war of attrition, and therefore we will have no choice but to go up the escalation ladder with all the risks that that entails. unless they stop it.
Yeah, I also want to emphasise is that we go by the guardrails of the rule of law. They have been illegal already in the ways in which they have conducted themselves. They've gone to Oxford Street. We go for military targets. And we have to make sure that our public are with us in that respect for law and not following suit. And so we're not going to meet illegality with illegality.
Great. Let's speak to the US Secretary of State. Then we have a discussion briefly about further targets with CDS and Secretary of State of Defence.
Our top American diplomat is played by Professor Phillips O'Brien. He's helping us test a scenario in which Washington has relatively good relations with Moscow and isn't immediately mobilising to help London. His face appears via video link on a big screen in the Cobra room. You'll hear the US President referred to as POTUS.
US Secretary of State, hello.
Hello, I can hear you fine.
Good. I was very interested by POTUS's tweet earlier in the night, on the more early morning, which said, whoever continues this, watch out, basically. Not long after that, the Russians attacked one of our submarines and now has launched another further attack on us. So is POTUS going to be true to his word, therefore, and recognise that this is an aggression by Russia, and now step in to support both NATO in an Article 5 and indeed us as allies with your assets that are currently in the North Atlantic?
Well, I think I have some good news that I've spoken with the Russians and they have said there are no more attacks coming in and they are happy to begin moves to a ceasefire with the U.S. acting as a broker. We did regret that second rounds of attacks. We did not know about them. However, we don't believe any more retaliation at this point will do more. You have sunk a Russian ship. They have attacked British targets. Moving up the escalation ladder achieves nothing at this point. So we very much now believe there is a window of opportunity to get a ceasefire and end this confrontation without any more risk, particularly a nuclear risk. And that is definitely the president's number one priority.
And do you believe the Russians when they give you that word?
We have always actually found the Russians to tell the president what the president believes to be true in these instances. And so the Russians' cooperation with the president has been better than many countries who have actually tried to provide information to smear the president in the past. So I do not believe that the Russians would be providing us automatically with deceptive information.
Okay, I won't remind you of your own statements you made before POTUS was the president. Would you therefore support us, please, in moving towards an Article 5 or a NAC meeting in NATO, which is a very important step of building that pressure on Russia to stick to its word, please?
We would consider that if the Russians reject a ceasefire. We really believe that we do not need to get to that point, that we go for the ceasefire first. We have to be honest about who has the cards here and who doesn't have the cards. And we're not quite sure that the British government and the British military has the cards to keep this war going.
Same as Zelensky.
We believe it's in your interest to have a ceasefire and in Russia's interest to have a ceasefire.
The Foreign Secretary.
Secretary of State, we would have the cards if the US maintained its historic role as a key ally of the UK, as we have yourselves from the Second World War and continuing.
Britain, as many European states, decided to underinvest in defense over the past 30 years. You set up your own debt. It is no longer up for the United States now, we believe, to play the cards for Europe. We are reorienting ourselves. We did warn you, and this is a situation into which you have put yourselves as much as anyone else.
Prime Minister, do we have to listen to any more of this?
Look, I think it's important that the US obviously sets out its case. But what I would urge you, US, is just to reflect on how this will play out on the very Pacific that you are reorientating yourself to. There are ripples in this world, and the ripples that have been started by Russia today will wash up on your shores of California. So I urge you to reconsider, allow the NAC to meet, and at least we can have a discussion with all our allies of NATO and start sending a message in parallel that a ceasefire is important, but also the international community of Europe and the Atlantic are united. To fail to do that in parallel is in the end to encourage Putin, and it will drive Britain to one of the few options we have, which is a nuclear escalation. If you force us in a corner, do not be surprised at what we have to do to guarantee our safety. Thank you.
Thank you.
As the call with the US Secretary of State ends, the head of NATO appears again on the line with some much-needed good news. The role is played by Elizabeth Braw.
Norway and the Netherlands have declared themselves willing to assist the UK. Outside a NATO context, you will be receiving further updates directly from the Norwegians and the Dutch, but under the circumstances, I think this is a positive step. Let's see how this further evolves within the next few hours.
Thank you, Secretary General. It's nice to know we can rely on our friends at this moment.
While it won't shift the balance of power in the UK's favour, the decision by Norway and the Netherlands to join the fight is a big morale boost. Denmark has also decided to be part of an emerging coalition of the willing. All three nations operate the F-35 fast jet, significantly bolstering the UK's defences. But the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, along with Poland, all close allies of the UK, are preoccupied with their own security. Russia has started moving troops to its border with NATO's eastern flank. The National Security Advisor says the UK should seek to build as big a coalition as possible, even if it becomes a European NATO operation without the US.
So, PM, I think we have to proceed on the basis that we can't rely on the Americans, even in these circumstances. There will be other European allies who will see the force of the argument, and so I think you have to try and convene European NATO, even if the Americans won't turn up, and get them to essentially conclude that this does amount to an Article 5. I think the question for you, PM, is are you going to give the Americans any time to see whether their ceasefire proposal is going to work? In other words, delay any military action ourselves, which the Russians would use as an excuse for a further wave, and thus leave the initiative with the Russians to decide whether or not there's going to be a further wave of attacks? Do we take the Americans at their word on that? Or are we going to ask CDS to take the actions that are available to us, recognising the escalation? I think that's the crucial question for now. Do we wait for the Americans to see whether there is a real ceasefire here possible and leave the next move to the Russians, or do you want to take the next move yourself?
I am hoping at this moment that the Russian second wave has completed and we have sunk the submarine.
He's told the submarine has been sunk.
Okay, so then not standing down, but having a watching brief, or what do we say, standing at readiness, I don't know what, shadowing the task force, and waiting to see what Russia's next move, which in itself will indicate a ceasefire or not, is, I think, the right moment to do so, as in the ball is in their court. In the meantime, we need to prepare a set of targets predominantly focused at the task force, if we may, but at the same time developing to maturity the strategic dilemma elsewhere.
But the Prime Minister is not the only one giving orders. In the Kremlin, the President has moved to his own small radio studio for a live broadcast.
All right. The government of the Russian Federation now demands that Britain and its NATO allies desist from further armed attacks on the Russian Federation.
Simultaneously, the British side is alerted to a new message from Moscow.
Further armed attacks on the Russian Federation? Well, when I last looked, there's only been self-defense. The Russian statement makes certain demands, as ever, as Putin does. The President of Russia is willing to talk peace.
I am willing to talk peace. However, we must make it very clear that we have specific and legitimate demands which must be strictly adhered to prevent further bloodshed and to avoid any thought of escalation. Russia, we must remind you, is a nuclear-armed power.
We must remind you as a nuclear-armed power. He reminds us that all the time and has done throughout the Ukraine conflict.
If we are forced to use this powerful arsenal, then the United Kingdom will simply cease to exist.
Basically evoking a nuclear threat that they would annihilate us.
We therefore demand that the chastised British government
order an immediate and unconditional ceasefire,
and that its forces should all withdraw to its sovereign territory.
Somewhat ludicrous demand. I suspect, CDS, that none of our capabilities are in Russian sovereign territories, so I think his demands are limited and hollow anyhow. I mean, we probably have one or two vessels that are in international waters.
These are non-negotiable. These movements must be completed by midnight Moscow time today. We need not remind anyone in this world of the consequences of a nuclear-armed attack. If one missile or bomb falls on Russian sovereign territory, then the entire Russian Federation and all of its allies around the globe will combine to destroy Britain.
He then goes on to remind everyone that they're not bluffing.
We are not bluffing. We are sincere, as we have proven today.
We appeal to the reason of the British people.
Come to your senses, British people. Lay down your weapons. Do not let your criminal and terrorist-sponsoring government lead you into certain destruction.
That's all for the St. Petersburg trolls, no doubt, to magnify. They expect us to respond.
We expect the British government to respond appropriately to our reasonable demand by 12 midday London time.
It's 11 o'clock. Russia's president has raised the threat of a nuclear attack on the UK as he issues an ultimatum for a ceasefire. Images posted on social media show empty shelves in supermarkets nationwide as people rush to buy bottled water, tinned food and other emergency supplies. And there are growing traffic jams on the main roads out of London as residents in the capital ignore government advice to stay at home and instead try to flee. Downing Street says the Prime Minister's in an emergency meeting. He has 1 hour to decide how to respond to Moscow's demands.
Coming up in episode 5.
We have the nuclear deterrent. What circumstances would we use it, Prime Minister?
The Wargame was written and presented by me, Deborah Haynes. The series producer is James Shield. The development producer is Jess Swinburne. Original music and sound design are by Tom Kinsella. Additional production by Katie Scholes. The editor for Tortoise is Jasper Corbett. For Sky News, the commissioning editor is Paul Stanworth, and the executive producers are Sarah Whitehead and David Mapstone.